Hello, everyone, and welcome to this conversation presented by White House Custom Color.
Are you trying to mute me?
No, it's just real loud, and I can't.
I sold Amazon, but it was $25.
Listening to listen, not listening to respond.
Yes! Oh, thank you for that.
Hi, Jed. I'm Chris Hanline, the CEO here at White House Custom Color.
We've essentially created and then sent out this consumer-facing survey, right? Can you tell me what it was and why we did it?
So we wanted to focus on consumers who had been portrait active in the last 24 months. We wanted to get the perspective on those that had already spent money on photography in the recent past. We were not necessarily attempting to determine if more people would be interested in pro photography. We were more wanted to focus on those that had already shown interest and if their thoughts and perspectives had been changed by the pandemic.
And what about the results? Can you tell me about the results and start with the results?
So overall, I think we had great news. We were excited about what we got back. It didn't seem like there were too many bad news stories in the results. Consumers value pro photographers and they value what pro photographers provide. But as we've seen for a few years now, pro photographers need to sell that value to those end users, those consumers, and not answer the question on what they don't want for them. And overwhelmingly, the results suggested that physical product was a part of what people were looking for and what they're looking to, why they're looking to go to a pro. And ultimately, they still, even during the pandemic, want to document life events. And they are excited about working with pros and what a pro can provide in those types of scenarios. And it continues the fall on the pro to identify those events and market to those types of consumers.
Ed Monahan, it is a pleasure.
My pleasure to be here, Jed. Always a great opportunity to spend time with you and the audience and share what we've come to learn and what we are excited to tell them about the consumer market.
Start with this. Tell me a little bit about who you are. I like people to know who I'm talking to.
Well, that's a pretty easy one. I'm Ed Monahan. I spent 35 years at a combination of Kodak and then I spent another 3.5 at Kodak Lars. Spent a lot of time studying consumers, studying the markets, forecasting, trending, really paying attention to not only what people do, but why they do it, and maybe how that's going to change. Spent a lot of time with the color paper and the professional side of market, came to love the science and the art of photography. I appreciate what they do because I can't do it. I sing in the shower and they call Child Protective Services to get the kids out of the house before anybody gets hurt. And it's the same thing with the camera in my hand. I'm dangerous. So I have come to appreciate the people who do this for a living. They're gifted, Jed. God has made them different. They see life through the lens and they do some great stuff. So we're excited when we're able to share what we've learned and what we think will help them do what they do so well, maybe a little better, maybe a little more successfully.
Yeah, I'm married to one of those people. And I know by being married to one, I know that I am not one. Yes. I am also dangerous with a camera in my hand.
So the microphone.
Right. The mic, I can handle the mic a lot better than a camera. Tell me now, so you created and conducted a survey.
Yes, White House with Chris Hanline's leadership and the marketing team set out to really discover a few things, and it was really the fallout or the concerns with what is COVID doing to us societally. How is the consumer seeing the effects of COVID? And is there an opportunity as people face national crisis to maybe make family and photo a little more sentimental, a little more special, a little more important? We certainly wanted to understand how the consumer has seen a change in their attitude and behavior when it comes to both personal and professional photography. And then we wanted to get a sense, Jed, of what lifestyle changes has Kodak had that will stay with us well beyond the COVID termination point when we have vaccines and treatments. And really, I guess the heart of it was, in addition to whether consumers see value in professional photographers, and to cut to the chase, they do, are there changes that COVID lifestyle, and we'll talk about some of the norms that we see coming, will that affect the way a high-end professional has to adjust their products, their processes, and their business models. So we set out to survey 1,500 portrait actives. We qualified the audience that we spoke to through the survey. It's biased, right? It's entirely people who have demonstrated a propensity to portraiture. So they have a higher spend rate and affinity to portraiture. But the thing we wanted to discover is, coming out of COVID, what can we do to help the White House client base, the White House audience, react to, adjust, and respond to what COVID is doing to the consumer market?
So you survey the consumers in order to help the White House client, better move forward as a result of what's happened to all of us because of COVID.
So we should let you answer the questions, because you just summarized much more concisely than I did what we set out to do.
Well, that's my job. That's my job.
Yes, you repeated back to me in a much more effective, efficient, and concise way what we set out to do and how we intend to use the data to help our audience be more successful. Yes.
Right. I mean, what it comes down to is the rising tide raises all ships, and we want our clients to do well. In order for that to happen, they need their clients to still be interested in and engaging with them and buying photographs, essentially, right? Well, let's dive into this survey a little bit. Where did you start? Like, what does that process even look like?
Well, I think what it starts with is, what are your learning objectives? What are you intentional to discover about your audience, and how will your audience, being a consumer, and the discovery thereof, enable you to better serve your photographer customers?
Mm-hmm.
So you start with learning objectives, and we basically created a 10-question limit. We wanted to really look at a framework, through the COVID experience, how do consumers today find family and photos as important? Did they work on photo projects? Is there, again, that tendency or propensity or affinity towards photography as a whole? We got into some interesting questions. Would they go to a pro to get their photos updated? Why or why not? Where would they print their content? So we basically structured a framework of what led to the questions, designed 10 questions, worked with the marketing team and Chris, and just kept whittling it down and vetting it down and filtering it till we got to the point where we said, the answer to that question will help guide and show us what we need to know to be effective in helping our photographer customers better serve the consumer market. We had a qualifying question, Jed. As I said, we were specifically talking to those that were portrait active. We we went out to 2,954 persons and asked them, have you purchased a photo from a professional photographer in the last 24 months? 1,500 or so, really 1,429 came back yes. So, we've been doing this for years. The mechanics are pretty cut and dry for us. The real challenge in making the survey effective is getting the questions right, so that when you can take a chance to analyze the responses, you have meaningful, relevant data that, again, is actionable. And that's always one of our tests is, so what is the thing I used to say when I was at Kodak. If you asked a question and got an answer, how would you say, so what? So what would you do differently? And I think these 10 questions, as we go through this today, will really help shape for photographers an appreciation and understanding of the market that they serve and what kind of motivates them and how they value professionals.
So you initially start with, okay, we'll round some numbers here because that'll be easier for my brain. But you initially start with around 3,000 fairly decent randomized sampling of consumers. And you start by asking them, have you purchased professional photography or photography products in the last 2 years? That's what you start with.
That's correct. Right. That's the qualifying question. Those that say yes are invited in. Those that say no are disqualified.
Okay, so essentially half then said yes. So right away we can start with, okay, about half of everyone we asked, so half of our sampling said yes, they have.
Yes, and that's relatively consistent with the last 20 years of research in terms of portrait participation. When you include volume and sports and school, where you've got a large population of users, across the U.S. population, you probably have a 35%, 40% participation rate. So us being at 50% was a little higher than that should have indexed. But again, it's just the nature of sampling. when you think about independence and you take volume out, typically the U.S. population participates at about a 15-20%. So
Yeah.
we knew if we wanted 1,500, we were probably going to have to interview 3,000 or more to get qualified to 1,500. But yeah, you once again said it faster, better, and more effectively than I have.
Well, so again, along those lines, then, how do portrait active consumers differ from just the regular normal consumer population?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the survey had some overall learnings that we can cover, but what we really found is portrait actives, and one of the things that was exciting was this was not inconsistent, or I should say it was consistent with what we've historically seen. Portrait active consumers do differ from the consumer population at large. They're definitely more inclined to have done photo projects. Photo as a hobby, as an active interest, excites them and energizes them. They're more inclined to spend on family photos. And what was exciting to us is they were more inclined to use a pro to update their photos. And really the heart of the survey, they were more inclined to use a pro going forward. The other exciting thing is we asked a few questions about protocols, and versus the general population, the portrait active consumer is more inclined to go to a studio as soon as it opens. Yeah, there were those that said we would wait for the right protocols, but it wasn't like a half the respondents said that we got to have a vaccine in place. There was a fair amount that said, yeah, we're going. So it was exciting to see that kind of data and that kind of consistency.
Were you surprised personally, do you think?
So that's a great question, and I'm going to play the politically correct answer and give you both an answer.
Okay.
When I think about history, and when you take all the emotion out and the woe is me, and people don't want to use the pro anymore, when you really stop and think about statistics and data, no, I wasn't surprised. There's definitely a subset of people who appreciate and value a professional. We'll talk about that. I think because there's been a growing tendency to have photographers produce content, creative genius in the way that they form and compose the images, but then deliver it on digital format only. I think we all are biased to perceive and believe that perhaps the professional market is shrinking. I think what we would conclude at White House is the amount of capture is probably as great today as it was 20 years ago. People continue to value using a professional. The lab side of things, we may be seeing fewer prints because those who take professional pictures and purchase professional pictures at a consumer level don't always buy physical product from the professional. And so I think that kind of makes us think that the market is shrinking. So to answer your question, no, not surprised when you really strip away the emotion and all the subjectivity. People, not everybody, but 35, 40% of the people still understand and appreciate the tremendous value a professional brings to the market.
All right, let's strip away the emotion from this question then, because I have no interest in the political piece. I'm really more concerned with the empirical data, right? Which is really what this is about. COVID has changed things, and things have changed as a result of what has happened in the last 4, 5, 6 months, right? In our world, in our economy, in our society, in our culture. What are the new norms, do you think, that we can expect to occur and that we're going to be following or that are going to be affecting us moving forward?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's kind of an anchor of why we ran the survey.
Yeah.
What we've discovered, Jed, is that much of the technology that's being used today has been intended as a workaround during stay-at-home restrictions, infrastructure shutdown. But our suspicion from the data is that these solutions are going to prove to offer greater convenience and efficiency and show staying power beyond COVID. So let's just assume not that there's a vaccination or a treatment by the end of the year, early next year, and COVID is no longer top of the news. Zoom is here to stay. Online e-commerce is here to stay. I hope that, from a distance learning standpoint, we get the kids back in school at the appropriate time and way, for all the reasons that education is important. But even again, the technology of remote learning, distance learning is something that we're going to have to deal with. So we would say that virtual and remote communications, as an example, those served by Zoom, are going to continue well beyond COVID. It's an efficiency. Work from home. Wow, that's the new way of the future.
Right.
online shopping will continue to surpass brick and mortar stores for efficiencies. Now, saying that about a consumer, and we'll spend, since this is a series, we'll obviously have some time in the next 2 sessions to discuss. What does that mean to the photographer selling process? I mean, you and I today are virtually doing this. We see each other, we're connected, we're talking as if we were in the same room, though we clearly aren't. Will photographers' selling processes, methods, and tools need to adapt to e-commerce and to a Zoom sales session, as opposed to meeting the consumer or client in a coffee shop? Because of the lingering COVID concerns, is it possible that the consumer says, I still want to see your portfolio, I want to appreciate and understand what's available to me, but I don't want to sit 3 to 4 feet at the same table with you? So I think that, and I love the term reimagine, I think that in-person selling is going to be redefined and reimagined in light of Zoom and other technologies. You know, the opportunity for online galleries may prove useful. So I think, again, the use of technology to engage and connect people remotely, virtually, is going to be here for a long, long time. I think the rise of Amazon and the continued use of online sales tools is going to be the consumer's first choice. And how photographers understand that and adapt that is going to be where we spend the next couple of sessions.
Do you think that COVID essentially just sped up the inevitable? Like we just jumped forward a few years maybe into what was already coming in a lot of ways?
Yes, I think that's an excellent conclusion. I think that what it did is it acted as an accelerant, as you say. What it did is force people who may have been loath or resistance to change to have to. But yes, I don't think it introduced a new behavior across the board. I think what it did is it created an opportunity for technology to show its efficiency to a much larger audience. And I think people tried it. You know, it's going to be interesting, you know, Zoom. Don't you wish we had bought stock 2 days before the national pandemic was announced? But I think that I think the flip is true, and I want the photographer audience to hear and appreciate this as well. I think that there are times and places that Zoom is going to serve very well, remote working, and it's going to work very well. I also think there's times where families and friends are going to need to gather face-to-face and return to a day of socialization that we used to know prior to COVID. But yes, great point. COVID. Well,
I would like to think too that another thing that it has done is maybe gotten us to see things that we took for granted maybe. And now, you know, to socialize and be together with your family is a bigger deal, right? Like even if you're even if you're practicing social distancing, even if you meet your family at a park, to see your parents or your cousins or your really good friends, even at a distance across the other end of the table, is that much more of a big deal now. And I feel like you kind of break through that mode of, oh, this is something we took for granted. You never thought about it beforehand. In fact, a lot of times you would even dread like, I don't want to go to this family thing or whatever. And now it's different now, because now it's different to meet in person when for a while, it's like absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? Like when you don't know what you got till it's gone. Let me use that one. It gets yanked away from you. And then when you get it back, it's like amazing.
Yeah. I was thinking both those phrases, you know, we do take for granted what's available to us all the time. And then we have a greater and renewed appreciation for it. So yeah, that's a great summary, Jed. And I think that again, hopefully what it'll do is ignite a desire in the minds and hearts of consumers to obviously socialize face-to-face and to commemorate and document and memorialize the strength of the family, the solidarity of the family, the functionality of the family, where portraiture serves them very, very well.
Well, that brings me back to the survey too. Like, did you find that the different people that are interested in portraits, that 1,500 people, that they're drawn to, you know, portraits and photos at all levels of a business?
Yeah, that was our hypothesis going in. You know, we can say portrait active consumers have affinity for photo overall. They tend to be more photo active. They tend to span a multiplicity of projects, cards, calendars, looking at pictures, wall art, all the things that we have the data and statistics on. It was interesting that many of the respondents indicated they wanted to work on photo projects, but just didn't have the time. There were those that indicated they had no interest, but you know, I think to your point, the portrait active consumer is characterized by a diverse set of projects and products. And there's a list in our one response to the question. I think that they demonstrate a higher interest in investment in photo altogether. And so you get the haloing. I've got my personal pictures because, it's happening real time. It's spontaneity. It's casual. The professional can't be there. But then there's the times that I have a special occasion or I want to create a special occasion to commemorate children. The summary would be, yes, consumers that are portrait active, are photo active, they engage with photography on the whole, a much higher awareness and appreciation of the joy and the emotional component or the emotional attachment that photography has. They get it. I mean, they're our sweet spot. They're the ones we want to target for marketing and communications and bring them to the studio time and time again.
They're willing and able to make that distinction, between the two scenarios that you brought up, which is, the spontaneous piece and the intentional piece, right? Like, oh, this is something that I really think is worth capturing, and I am going to trust it to a professional in order to make that happen rather than just take some snapshots, right?
Oh, absolutely. And again, one of the questions we asked was, is there a tendency to spend more on family photos as a result of the COVID and the sentimentality? Our hypothesis was that COVID, and you talked about it, YOLO, you only live once, national crisis, you don't realize what you've lost until you've lost it. We thought it would spark and stimulate some sentiment and some spend. That was the one surprise to me. It didn't really statistically drive a propensity or tendency towards spend. What we found though, is that more so than the general population at large, the respondents that were portrait active will spend more to update their family photos. And even those that said they're going to spend the same. And this was a takeaway that I credit Chris Handline. He's an amazing thinker. He's just got a mind for numbers. He sees a solution while the rest of us are still trying to figure out what was the question again.
I think he sees the matrix. That's how I think.
Yeah. But, his point was this, those that said I would spend the same, that's a win. In a world ravaged economically by COVID,
absolutely a win.
I'm going to spend as much as before COVID, that's a huge win. And so, again, the photo active, portrait active sort of demographic that we've talked to and spoken to in the survey has indicated that, in spite of COVID, I'm going to spend no less. And there were those that they're more. I do want to do a word of caution. One of our questions was around overall macro spend, not related to photo. And there was a response option summary that I would say is conservative, if not cautious. The outlook on macro spend is still cautious. It's resulting from, the potential for unemployment, the potential for a recession. And so, we've always said that portraiture is a premium or luxury category, a luxury product sale. The flip side of the caution is there are those who are going to do what they're going to do. They're going to prioritize. They're going to get a portrait this Christmas or this fall. They're going to buy a school package this fall so when the kids are in school. The other thing that I will caution us on is the general population that we've studied at Kodak for 20 years, printing digitally, prints about a third of the work at a retailer, Walmart, Walgreens, Costco, CVS, about a fifth of the work at an online player like Shutterfly, and about 15% at home. This statistic in our survey, when we asked the question, if you were to print your digital files, where would you print them? It mapped almost perfectly to the consumer photo channel map that we had built at Kodak. We do need to be aware, and it's one of my conclusions, people want to print. If not sold at the time of the session or sitting, they will take that content and find a place to print. We need to repatriate that work back to the professional market. We need to, understand and appreciate that. Chris, I credit Chris with the second thing that he said to me a year ago. What the photographer hears the consumer ask in the queries are, do you deliver digital? Do you provide digital files? And that's a question. What the photographer hears is, I don't want prints. And that's not what they're saying. And so we've got to help the photographer appreciate and understand there's art to be sold, and there's a demand for it greater than we're seeing served today. So just a word of caution, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, and then, okay, so that's a really good point. And it makes me think, because I've heard that too. And I've actually thought that as a result of hearing that, at least before. But just because they say that, it certainly doesn't mean that I don't want prints. Now, it might manifest at some point into them not getting around to printing them. And I think that that's where, we can help. I think that there are things that can be done to assist with that. But I do think it's extremely important not to just write those consumers and those customers off simply because they ask the question, oh, can I have these digitally, right?
Exactly. Yes. And, it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. If your going position is, well, no one wants to print anymore. They don't print their own photos. They social media everything. They don't want my content reduced to print. I think that's a misunderstanding. Now, is there a population of people who want professional content and for whatever reason, economic or otherwise? But again, we'll get to this in our discussion. The survey was fascinating. And the key question we asked about going forward, would they use a pro? Why or why not? And when we talk about that, it to me, and you talk about the empirical evidence or the empirical data, it drives home the point that there is demand for physical portraits, quality, creative, beautiful artwork that is greater than is being served today. And
the experience too, right? Like that experience is a big piece of what people are purchasing. What they really want is the process that a professional photographer can offer them too.
That's a great point, Jed. We often say that the portrait world is reduced to physical prints and some of the artistic capability that's manifests when they snap the shutter. But you're absolutely right. There's two other dimensions that get lost in portrait artwork. One is the experience. What is it like to interact and engage and to trust and to be served more than with photography? But, especially a wedding, a bride, I don't have to worry and look over my shoulder wondering, is he there to get the right shot? He knows than I. The other one is the personality. The brand of the photographer is not the quality of the print that's on the wall exclusively. It's who he is and who she is and how, to your point, how they build and serve that experience and how they interact. Yeah. No, that's a good point. We tend to, in our 0 and 1 world of economics and production, wrap ourselves around SKUs and prices and prints and wall art. But there's a bigger picture, a bigger dimension to serving the consumer and winning their business and satisfying them. A great point.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's take some time to focus on specific positives, like big things that excited you about what, and I know we've touched on a few of them, but let's summarize them. Let's go over a few things in particular.
Yeah, there were two questions that were the heart and soul. And, I learned a long time ago, be careful what you ask for, especially if you can't stand the answer. But we set ourselves up for the possibility that we were going to ask two questions. Would you be willing to use a pro to update your family photos specifically? And then going forward beyond the COVID experience, are you going to use a pro? Why or why not? And I won't say it was surprising. It was pleasing. It was a word. The number of photographers, and I've got my statistics here, the number of photographers or the number of consumers who said they would use a photographer to get their photos updated was very impressive. And we asked the yes or no question with 3 yeses. The first yes was, I haven't used a pro before, but this opportunity excites me. I'm going to try it. Then there was the second yes was, I used to use a pro, kind of gotten away from it, but this rekindles, and I call the first one being activated. They weren't photo active, portrait active. Now they are going to, at least the intention score was. There's those that are rekindled. And then there's the ongoing sustaining. I always use a pro and I'm going to keep doing it. It was great to see that 30% were the rekindle. They were the ones that said, I used to use a pro and I'm going to go back and do it. There was 23% that are always using a pro. And then there was 12% that said, I haven't really used a pro, but I'm going to start. So the total yes population of respondents was very encouraging. I do the math in my head, about 65% of the respondents.
Yeah, about 2/3. I'm looking at the chart right now, actually, and I'm encouraged. I'm also, I think it was a great idea to give more than one yes and more than one no.
Well, thank you.
Like, sure, this could be a yes or no answer, right? But to go beyond that and get more information, especially that first one, I will start. That gives you the opportunity to really parse out the responses and see what's beyond just the yes or beyond the no. And that's super exciting, I think.
It really was, Jed. And so my conclusion to get off the numbers and put it in layman's terms,
Mm-hmm.
the yeses across all three dimensions demonstrate a high level of loyalty and repeat purchase. This is good news for photographers.
Yeah.
It also indicates some level of activation. I was worried that number might be 0 or 2 or 3%, a meaningless.
Low, right?
Yeah. There is the no that jumps out at you, the iPhoneography phenomena, do it yourself. And we'll get to the next question in a second and talk about how this audience of active consumers differs so much from the general population and what they identify are barriers. But, there is still the reality that the professional, and I won't say the professional is competing with iPhoneography, but the consumer has that as an alternative for some of world and life events. There was one thing that I really wanted to call the attention to, though, and I think it's great news. I wrote in the report, good news, no, really great news.
Mm.
We asked the question, or one of the response options was, professional photos are just not that important to me. Across the general population, that statistic might be 20, 25%, at least 20. Only 6% of the portrait actives would say, I'm not going to use a professional to update my family photos because, by the way, pro photos are not important. Being only 6% is a good news. So what I draw out of this, Jed, is, again, there's tremendous value understood and appreciated, and the consumers that are active, have come to define their photography in a mix of, their personal content that they do every day, simultaneous or instantaneous with when the events happen. But there's still this understanding and desire for professionals. Now, the question that really excited us was the next question.
That's what I want to get to, yeah.
Yeah, going forward, would you use a professional photographer and why? We allowed them, there were 5 yeses, and they could pick 3, so you're not going to add to 100 with each of these response options.
Right.
You could pick 3, and there were 5 yeses, and there were 5 nos. This did surprise me. So, and I'll get energized and I'll get my voice going. And for those that can see me on the camera, I'll get moving around and shaking and everything. The 5 yeses in total were statistically higher than any one of the nos. It was just a shock to me. I thought you might get 3 of the top ratings a yes, and then a no or 2 thrown in there, and then back down to the bottom 2 yeses. So the fact of the matter is, the fact that the yeses were statistically in the top 5 and were the top 5 is great. And what it also reveals is, well, so you say, yes, they're going to use a pro going forward. The thing that's meaningful, and we want to spend some time in the next couple of sessions talking about, is, well, what is it about the professional experience and offer that causes them to say yes? This concept of quality and creativity for special moments and occasions, the heartbeat of this industry is special occasions, life moments and events that they don't trust themselves to, or that deserve better than I could do myself. That comes through loud and clear. There's also this demonstration or understanding identification of quality. The pro's brand, the pro categorically stands for high quality products. That we can never lose sight of that. And that's where White House fits, and that's where the professional photographer form kind of an ecosystem. The professional has the ability to capture and see life through the lens, and in a moment in time, grab the persona as only they can do it.
Yep.
But that then reduces to wall art or albums or cards or very beautiful renderings that are done through a company like White House. And so I think that this opportunity is simultaneous to the photographer and to White House. The other thing that I learned from the wedding market was putting their mind at ease. The wedding market in particular, the last thing the bride wants to do is be in the back of her mind, is Uncle Harry is he drunk? Is he sitting down? Does he have the camera? Is he doing what he should do? The pro got her back, and that, to be less than eloquent. That's it. The other thing that's interesting to me in the table of data is statistically, too expensive was cited by less than 20% of the respondents. To put that in context, in a general population of users and non-users, actives and inactives, we usually see about a third. A third of the market will say, I don't use a pro because they're too expensive. And frankly, that's a cop-out. But if you talk to just non-actives, and the numbers I remember from my Kodak days, the non-actives, the people who we've interviewed, those that chose not to purchase, so it's not a mix of actives and inactives as the general population is, when you bias and skew this sample to those that have rejected the portrait offer, too expensive is typically 50+%. I mean, I've seen some surveys where it's 60 to 65%. And again, I think that's a cop-out. The other thing that was like the previous one. We asked them, or we offered them the response option to say, no, I would not use them because I had a previously bad experience. Be careful what you ask for. That could have been cited by many. Less than 3% or about 3% said that they would not use a pro because of a bad experience. So that says as an industry, we're doing something right. We're not creating monsters. We're doing that. My summary, what really gets me excited, Jed, is that the respondents clearly value pro quality and craftsmanship. They disregard the do-it-yourself good enough mentality that their non-active brethren, tend to hide behind. To me, when I design surveys, I almost wanted to take out cost, price, or too expensive, because I do believe it's a cop-out. You hide behind the easy answer. Oh, it's too expensive. Too expensive is not an answer. I don't have a need for the content at that level for that price, or with iPhoneography, I've got an abundance of content. But there's this growing, and you asked me earlier in the talk, was I surprised by anything, or in the particular question we're talking about? We do get caught up in hearing so many times, iPhoneography, do it yourself, it's cheaper, it's faster, it's whatever, it's good enough. Boy, I hated that word. That word came up about 5 or 7 years ago in a lot of our context setting for professional portrait surveys. And what's exciting to me is we had 42% of our respondents, or 42% of the responses, and it obviously was respondents as well. They said that they would use a pro because the pro provides quality and creativity for special occasions. I mean, we could spend the next hour, and we will in the next couple of sessions, talking about the marketing around this. Okay, so you don't have to drive an appreciation or an awareness that you're good. You've got to let them know that you're available. When you think about marketing and salesmanship and merchandising, the hardest part is convincing them that you're competent and capable, and that you're should be considered. Yep. The easier is, I'm available. Let's pick a date and time for me to do it. So, the thing I really want to summarize too, and we bias the survey above 25,000 for income. The survey has some demographic questions, and it's worth noting for just a minute or two. There is a sweet spot of photography and portraiture, and it's been this sweet spot demographically for the 30 years that I've been associated with the industry. Household with a child 0 to 12 years old. The preponderance of portrait activity centers on a household with a child. Children drive photography, children drive portraiture, children are part of extended families, functional families, et cetera, et cetera. So the very first demographic is, you're going to probably serve a client or seek a client who's got a child in the house, whether you're photographing the child individually as part of the family structure. The other thing is the age level. The sweet spot in this survey was 30 to 44 years old, which probably coincides with the child in the house 0 to 12.
Sure.
What's fascinating, Jed, was the 45 to 60 age group tended to be more portrait active than I have seen historically. Not sure if that's, again, the millennials, the Gen Ys getting married later and having children later, and so their 15 or 12-year-old child, is when they're 45,
yep.
or if it's grandparents. And with so much online buying and so much of families that are spread across the country, it's possible that it's grandparents. And again, if you think about it, it doesn't mean that they are buying the prints of the children and the grandchildren. It may mean that the children are buying for their parents. So the other thing is portraiture tends to center on affluence. The sweet spot is an income greater than 50,000, really greater than 75,000. And that stands to reason, right? I mean, I'm sure BMW would say the same thing. I'm sure Tesla would say this. They're not selling to the guy that's, making $25,000, $35,000 a year.
Right.
And I don't want to in any way imply that there's not a market of opportunity for lower income demographics, socioeconomic demographics. There are communities that we studied 10 and 20 years ago that economically should not have been portrait active in terms of the relative discretionary spend that was available to them. But it was important to commemorate the graduation of a senior because that was the graduated. So again, to recap, parent with a child 0 to 12, probably between the ages of 30 and 45, and probably making 50,000 or more. That's who you're going to see come into the studio for the most part.
In the summary that I have, you say, sell what you do, who you are, and what you deliver.
Yes.
I really like that.
That's twice you've complimented me. Thank you, Jed. I appreciate it.
I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and it just popped into my head when someone asked me about branding, and I said, your brand is a who. And that has struck, and I said it, but I've been thinking about it ever since, because I've believed that for a long time. And who you are is such a big piece, and that ties right in with the experience that you can offer. And it's a fantastic way to be able to pull yourself away from just the person with an iPhone or the iPhoneographer or Uncle Frank at the wedding, right? Like, who you are and that experience that you can offer is a big piece. I'm excited about this survey too. Now, we're planning on doing a couple more of these. Can you give me a quick rundown on what you think we can expect to see in session 2 and 3?
Yeah, from the standpoint of we've today talked about raw data. We've given statistical evidence of a behavior, an attitude, an intention. If I'm a photographer, I'm saying this is good news. I would agree with it. And we can summarize kind of when we finish, what we've said today. But we haven't really talked about what to do with it. What do I as a photographer do from Labor Day through Christmas? What do I do next year? So I think for session 2, we want to say, what does it mean to you? The statistics won't change between now and session 2, but our ability to help create an action plan, a response to this. And then again, that's going to be people like myself who are not good at photography, not good at singing, pretty good with numbers. I think when we wanted to get to by session 3 are some of the peers of our listening audience, people like Vic, Matt Hodgman, people who will see it through, and I pun intended, right? See it through their lens. We'll write a statistical response option, kind of a game plan as a group of people who are binary, right? The world is 0 and 1. It's numbers, it's accounting, it's economic, it's interpretive elements. So I think in session 2, the audience will hear, well, what do you think we got to do, Ed? I mean, what would we say differently, or what would we say more of the same? How would we target our audience? Where were we going to go with that? And then I think in session 3, hearing their peers, I'd love to hear Vicky's interpretation of these statistics, through the eyes and lens of a photographer. What does she think it means? What does it cause her to want to do more of or change them? So I see that going forward.
I think it's great. Anything that you would like to add in closing?
Yeah, I think my recap is, this is a good news story. And the danger with surveys, especially when there's this emotion that surrounds the subjectivity, we're going to hear that we're too expensive. We're going to hear that they got an iPhone. We're going to hear that this and that. We didn't hear those things, and we haven't heard them in 20 years. I think what it causes me to do, Jed, and we'll talk about this, is remind our audience that, be careful to separate fact from fiction. There's opinions about the consumer's attitude, and then there's these statistics. I think we have to realize COVID has created new norms. We're going to need to make adjustments, and that'll be part of our talk next week. And I think we've got to be fair. COVID has created some concerns and some caution. What excited us is not complete withdrawal. Without politicizing it, there are differing views of what to do to protect yourself. Sure. I'm concerned that statistically, people might have said, I get the value of a pro, love them for this special occasions they document, not going to use them for a couple of years, just can't put myself on that risk. We didn't hear that. There's not a complete withdrawal. The other things, and this is where we really will center next week or next session, they understand the value. I think there's a large part of our listening audience that would say, if asked, your opinion, do you think the consumer values what you do? And because there's a general population that's being considered and many that don't, it's easy to say no. Well, when we talk about the people who have made a decision to buy portraiture in the last 24 months, there's a reason that they're doing it. They do demonstrate the value. They're identifiable. They are an addressable audience, parent, child in the house, certain age group, certain income bracket. The two things that I would say in closing, the one question on where would you print, we have to be mindful, not fearful, but mindful that consumers have choices, right? The world has been democratized. I mean, you think, I laugh because I started at Kodak in 1982 and I had never seen a 120 negative or a 220 negative. I didn't understand licking paste and all that kind of stuff. But you think about it, there were barriers, there were reasons that a professional could not take his 120 negative to a mini lab because the mini lab only had a 35 millimeter gate. The mini lab had a 6-inch print web. You could only do a 5x7, maximum. You couldn't do an 8x10. My point in that is that technology has democratized the tools of photography. You can pretty much get anything anywhere. So they do have choices, but again, the data to me says they would prefer, if offered, the professional content reduced or manifest into physical print, to have the professional do it. The final thought is, and this is, I hope this comes across in the way it's intended. This is a great news story. There's opportunity, but it's not free. And I mean, not free economically. It's not free from a time and investment standpoint.
Yeah.
There's still work to be done, right? People are saying, you know, especially the question about, I'm going to start using a pro, or I'm going to go back and use one I haven't used one in a while, or I'm going to continue to use. It demonstrates intention and it demonstrates opportunity. But as you've said, there's an experiential component, there's a personality component, there's a product component, there's a craftsmanship component. And we need to talk about, how do you drive awareness? How do you drive consideration? How do you drive purchase? You know, how do you then retain the loyalty of that consumer to the next special occasion? So the data says it's yours for the taking, but you got to go take it. It's not going to come walking in the studio by default. And I think, again, that's where we'll spend the next session. So great news, great opportunity, a lot of work to do, but a pleasant surprise that those who value professionals know why they value them, can tell you why they value them, and choose to use them over and over again.
I am encouraged. I am inspired. I'm motivated. I hope that others can hear this and feel the same as well. And I look forward to our next discussion, my friend.
Yes, thank you for the questions. Thank you for the couple of compliments, and thank you for the insights. You said a few times, Jed, the things that we hope the survey would have done, because the data is relatively new to you, but you put it in the right context. And I think that between you and I, and hopefully some folks next week, or I keep saying next week, next session, we'll have an opportunity to go to the next step. Okay, so you guys are excited, you're energized. No one's walking through my door this month. What do I got to do differently?
Yeah, right.
And I'll close with what we wrote that you quoted: sell what you do, sell who you are, sell what you deliver. You are the brand. Your work is why they seek you. Give them an experience that they'll bring them back time and time again.
Well said, brother.
All right, friend. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
You too.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this conversation presented by White House Custom Color on YouTube. Be sure to check out our other content and click that subscribe button right there. Right. Right there. It's there somewhere.